Hello and welcome to Marco Polo Explores Time. Today, we might have a question that might make you feel uncomfortable. Are you wearing a women's watch? Look, in the industry we have what's called a lazy design, most famously called pink it and shrink it. And this is where we take a men's watch and we shrink it down to size to fit a woman's wrist. And we either throw some diamonds on it, or maybe we throw like a mother or pearl dial on it, and we call it a day, all right? So we're definitely going to discuss those situations and even some watches that might be having an identity crisis. But for the finale, we're going to turn the tables, and we're going to talk about a watch that was designed exclusively for a woman, and how they went through a series of upsizing and marketing towards men. I'm coining the term stretch it and spec it, or even better, it's called bulk it and bolt it. Now, before everyone starts shouting matches at me in the comments, hear me out. The reason for the question today comes from my wife. Now, my wife had something she wanted to celebrate, and for this particular celebration, she wanted to buy her first luxury timepiece. So I did what every great husband would tell her wife, and I said, hey, buy what you love. And she goes, okay. And I took her to all the best places you could possibly take your wife to shop for a luxury timepiece. I took her to Target, I took her to the Walmart, I took her to the Costco, and I took her to the Swatch. I joke. No, we hit all the big 80s. You know, we hit the Breitling, the Rolex, the Omega, we looked at the Chopard. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? But I took her in each place and I said, hey, try it on. Make sure it fits your wrist well. Make sure it matches the vibe and of how you dress and your lifestyle. And take some pictures and some videos of it, because you're probably going to want to look at this later, because you're not just going to walk into one store and buy something immediately when you're a real watch shopper. You want to know what all your options are. You're spending a lot of money. So, while we were shopping, she had put on a particular piece, and she looked at it, and she looked at me and said, you know, it has like a mother or pearl dial, and it's got some diamonds on it. She goes, but it seems kind of masculine. Is this just a man's watch that's downsized for a woman? Yes. That's exactly what they did. However, sometimes when they downsize a watch, it becomes its own thing, because they've changed enough stuff on it and the characteristics different. It has its own total vibe and it's totally feminine. And of course, there's also unisex watches. And she says, okay, so we get to this one particular 80, which I won't mention who, and she is looking at a watch that is, for her, the quintessential woman's luxury watch that she's seen everyone wear. And she's looking at it with a particular dial color, and we start looking around, and she sees the same watch. But instead of this big, she's a big. And she says, do they make women's watches specifically designed for women? And I was like, yes. And she goes, do they ever turn them into men's watches? And then it hit me like a brick. She doesn't want to look down at her watch and say, she looked like a man. So I realized right then I needed to give a really good explanation of what's going on in the industry, and to put her mind at ease and make sure she's kind of okay with what she's looking at, and why the designs are the way they got today. So let's talk about the first case in point. The first case in point I want to talk about today is going to be the Rolex Datejust. Now, when the Rolex Datejust first came out, it was a men's 36mm watch. And it came with a coin edge bezel and the famous Jubilee bracelet. Now, I believe it was in 1956 where they actually came out with what we consider more of the modern version of it. This is where they gave it the fluted bezel, and it still has the Jubilee bracelet. And it was pretty much the quintessential watch for men that we associated with, doing well. So Rolex did something in 1957 that started changing everything. In 1957, because the men's watch was so popular, they did what I would call a shrink it and pink it, and they came out with the Lady Datejust. Now, this is where the whole crisis starts, because over the years, the Lady Datejust became the quintessential women's luxury watch with status. So, even today, Rolex sells more Datejusts to women than men. And the quintessential style has always been, for a woman, a Jubilee bracelet with the fluted bezel. Because, you know, it kind of has this like flashy disco ball kind of thing going on, and it looks a little bit more elegant. Plus, you know, it's not a scratch monster like an oyster bracelet. So, with that said, it's kind of going like this. If you have a person that doesn't know anything about watches, particularly like my wife, and she has seen maybe her mom or her aunt or her boss, like always, you know, associating this watch with being a woman's watch, she doesn't look at the modern 41 millimeter watch on a guy and think, oh yeah, men's sports watch. No, she thinks it's a woman's watch made bigger. I totally understand. Next scenario we ran into. So, let's talk about how I explained to her how we went from women's watches to men watches. So, this is what I'm going to be coining as the bulk it and bolt it scenario. And we're talking about the Santos-Dumont. So, the Cartier Santos, back in 1904, I believe, it was Santos made this watch for his aviator buddy, and it was a bigger men's watch. And it was actually designed after a woman's case, but to make it look more masculine, he actually had to stretch the watch and bulk it up, and then he decided to put some screws on it. I think it was actually inspired by the Eiffel Tower or something. And that gave it a more industrial look for an aviator. And that's how we got to that watch today. So, was it originally designed for a man? Yeah. Was it originally a woman's K-shape? Absolutely, because you got to remember, women wore wristwatches before men ever did. They had them for a lot longer, and it was after World War I where they started wanting to put them on a man's wrist. So, now we're going to talk about the grand finale. This is the one watch that totally meets the criteria for stretch it and spec it, or bulk it and bolt it. And that is the 1982 Omega Constellation Manhattan. Here's a scenario. When it came out in 1982, this was a watch that was designed by a woman for women. Now, with that said, it was this ultra thin quartz design that had these pretty little claws, and it was marketed by the one and only supermodel Cindy Crawford, and it was a huge success. This thing is legendary. And so what did Omega do about it? Well, they wanted to make more money off of it, of course. So what did they do? They took the watch and they made it bigger, and they made it bulkier, and they made the claws bigger, and then they pulled out the little quartz in the battery and they threw it in the trash can, and then they shoved in a mechanical movement in it, and then they called it a day and marketed it towards men. So my question to that is, did they go far enough with it? Because sometimes when we turn a men's watch into a women's watch and it's done right, it's its own thing. The question I was on this one, is it enough? Or maybe would have bezel and dial change made this a little bit more masculine? You decide. All right, so how did my wife's watch journey end? Well, at the end of the day, she decided to pick a watch that was designed for women. And it really matches her wedding ring and her total professional vibe. Very beautiful, and it's totally a girl's vibe. Now, is that the only kind of watches she wears? No, of course not. At some point, she ended up buying a sports model watch in her journey, and that is the quintessential pink it and shrink it scenario, where we took a men's sports watch and we shrank it down, but it was done beautifully by the brand, and it looks very elegant, and it's its own thing. So, look, at the end of the day, good design is good design, no matter what sex it was made for. My question to you is, was my explanation to my wife good enough? Comment below and let me know. Also, now that we've talked about the Dumont and the Rolex and the Omega Constellation, when you look down at the watch on your wrist, does it make you feel any different about it? If you like this show, go ahead and hit like. If you want to see more content, go ahead and hit subscribe. I might actually do something else. Thanks for spending time with me today. Be good.